I'd like to start our program, first of all, by just saying good afternoon. It's great to see all of you. Happy 67th anniversary of the 26th of July movement. 67 years have gone by since that day, and I believe Lisa is going to give us some history about that in a second. I know that for me, Cuba really means dignity and human rights through democracy, through what Jose Marti called unidad para ganar. If the Cubans were not unified in order to win, they could never have achieved anything. And I think that's one of the messages we're going to be hearing from Sierra, because I know that's in Karen's contributions. So I'd really like to just plow right in. And today we're going to be sharing our lessons from Cuba, different trips that the participants have made to Cuba. I personally have been to Cuba now 14 times. The first time was in 1978. And I have learned enormously from all of the policy changes that have gone on that island. We're going to start today with Lisa Valenti, and I'm going to be asking each one of you to share a little bit about yourself, what you're doing right now, where you live, and then talk about the lessons that you have learned from Cuba. Lisa, would you like to begin?
Yes, my name is Lisa Valenti, and I first went to Cuba in 1971. I'm 72 years old now, and I was a part of the 1960s anti-war movement. And I think that was the insurrection of my generation. And the 60s is a time when you had the civil rights movement, you had the anti-militarism, anti-draft, all of these things came into a convergence. People found out that no matter what their personal experience with oppression was, that none of our oppressions were standalone oppressions, that they're all a part of what holds a system of capitalism and empire together. Because in our country, we have a caste system, and the caste system is color-coded. People of color are very easy to pick out and be at the bottom, but also you've got, I mean, obviously homophobia, all the other isms that we have that create divisions amongst us, that we have to learn to incorporate our familiarities, our own experiences. And I think when I went to Cuba in 1971, I was not, I did not understand revolution. In fact, I didn't even know Cuba had one. I was an anti-war activist, and on our passports in those days, there was an entire list of countries that one was forbidden to go to. And Cuba, starting with a C, was at the top of the list, and I decided to go to Cuba. And I was a pacifist, obviously coming out of the Vietnam struggle, from the anti-war struggle. So when I went to Cuba and saw people armed, and I said to people, haven't you ever heard of Martin Luther King? And people said to me, haven't you ever heard of the Bay of Pigs? Well, I had not heard of the Bay of Pigs. I didn't know anything about Cuba. The only reason I went there was because the government told me I couldn't. I did not appreciate Cuba in 1971. It was an agrarian society just coming out of the revolution. Obviously, 69? People were, there was not a lot of housing, there wasn't a lot of indoor plumbing, there wasn't a lot of the things that I took for granted as an American, and certainly a white American, as to what life should be like. So I wasn't necessarily impressed with Cuba. It took me quite a while. Actually, I think Cuba came into focus for me closer in the early 90s, when the Torricelli and Helms-Burton bill came along, and I also had the opportunity to go through Central America. Once I had been in Honduras, once I'd been in Guatemala, once I'd been in El Salvador, once I had been outside the continental United States again in colonized countries, I understood the importance of Cuba. I had always been a Cuba solidarity activist, I guess you would call it, but I had devoted my work after 1971 when I came back. I was the CIA, the FBI, and all of those types of folks came to visit me. And I was named by the House of Un-American Activities as a international subversive, which meant that they could open my mail, they would incarcerate me in time of war, all sorts of civil liberties that were going to be taken away from me because I had gone to Cuba, and it was a forbidden country. So a lot of my life was informed not so much by the Cuban Revolution, but in resistance to the state of the United States and my own government in trying to, I don't know, oppress me, I guess, and others. Obviously, racism. There were so many problems in our own country that required attention. And I had the opportunity to work with Pastors for Peace and meet Reverend Lucius Walker in whatever year that was, I think it was 1990, and urged Lucius to pick up the Cuban work. And he did, and we started the caravans. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Pastor for Peace Friendshipment caravans, but being able to travel throughout the United States, being able to go into cities, to see the local problems, how people are, how the big names like capitalism, all these names, how that impacts individual lives in individual communities, to be on the native reservations, to be in amongst so many people all over the country who were struggling to make a better world. And so I think that what Cuba did for me mostly was teach me that a revolution is a long time coming, and that there are many insurrections that occur, and we all are on hopefully we're all on a learning curve, and we learn from interacting with each other, the pain of our personal lives, how these institutional systems have impacted us in negative ways that we want to change, but that we need to come together in order to change that. And I think when I go to Cuba and I see that Cubans identify themselves all as Africans, that Cuba identifies its nation as an Afro-Caribbean nation, and it identifies with the people who have been most victimized and marginalized by these systems, our necessity to share empathy, to be tolerant. We're not a revolutionary culture yet. We have to learn from each other, and we have a lot to learn from the successes of Cuba and some of the failures, not only of Cuba, but of other aspiring nations who have been trying. Venezuela, one, Nicaragua, you can name them. All of the struggles these people are also going through in trying to be self-determinant and to be democratic and have a say in building their communities for their future. So I think that what Cuba has taught me is patience. I think, like Martí, I would think that my understanding of the world is far more of an international understanding, that humanity is our homeland. And what they used to say in the 60s, you know, 100 Vietnams, or that we're all Fidels, or all of these types of things. The importance that no one can be left behind, that we have to be inclusive, that we have to be educational, that we have to be tolerant. And we also need to inform ourselves on whose shoulders we stand. When I look at what's going on in Portland, when I see what's going on, well, in every city right now with Black Lives Matter, the importance of solidarity, the importance of all of these things. But when I see the moms of Portland come out, and then the dads get behind them with the leaf blowers to disperse the gas and everything, we are a people with ingenuity. We are a people with empathy, and this struggle is going to be long and hard, and we're going to just have to continue to support each other. I would say it took me a long time to not compare Cuba to my own experience, because Cuba has, after the revolution, organized its societies around CDRs and around different, whether it's the Women's Federation or the Farmers Federation or the workers or whatever. They've organized themselves and their contribution and ability to have impact on their quality of life in a very, very different way than we are even considering in this country, where we're still looking for party solutions to our political dilemmas. That said, I think it's very important that everybody use every tool in our toolbox to impact change, and that goes from all the way of street actions to participating in protecting the vote. I had a very long talk with Fidel. I've had the opportunity to meet Fidel quite a number of times. I have 2 medals of honor from him for being on a 94-day hunger strike one time and a 23-day hunger strike another time. And one of the things that Fidel said is, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. Make sure that you defend the mechanisms of democracy, things like votes. Even though we know that our vote has been corrupted, even though all of these things, we still, we have to protect tools of inclusion for people. And I thought that was an important statement for him to make. I don't know, I'll just stop there, and I suppose we'll have other speakers and other things that'll set off a dialogue. I don't want to make a monologue of all this, but I appreciate very much the opportunity to be with you today and to bear a little bit of witness to the things that I've had the incredible opportunity and gratitude for in my own life in shaping my worldview.
And Lisa, just to understand, can you tell us a little bit about the organization that you've worked with in the United States?
I did most of my, I would say my mentoring, a lot of my mentoring, aside from the people that I had the incredible opportunity to meet during the 1960s, was from Lucius Walker from Pastors for Peace and other internationals that I met through that organization. And one of the things that Pastors was doing was providing assistance for people caught in the crossfires during the Central American Wars. And when I went down there, there was a great movement in this country, which was supported by liberation theology, for what they called sister cities. And many cities and communities in this country gave people like me an opportunity to go into war zones where you could see the impact of firsthand of American imperialism. And so when I came back from that, I got the idea that that the prejudice against Cuba was almost Pavlovian, and that people needed to have an opportunity to go to Cuba for themselves, and they needed to see Cuba through the eyes of their own passions, a ballerina to a ballerina, that we needed to make common cause. Whatever it was you had a passion for, we would introduce you to someone that shared your passion. So we had sister swamps, sister hairdressers, sister nail salons, all of these little local initiatives that people took because they really wanted an opportunity to get to know Cuba and Cubans. So we founded the U.S.-Cuba Sister Cities Association. In Pittsburgh here, I am now the vice president, because my former senator is the president of the Pittsburgh Matanzas Sister City Partnership. We have had that, I think, almost 30 years now. And we have taken all of our local politicians. We've had Cubans come up here. We had closed down the Clemente Bridge and brought in Cuban boxers. We just recently signed a memorandum of agreement with the University of Pennsylvania, Penn State, with the University of Havana to open up a resource center in Cuba. I think we'll be the first people to actually have physical space that the Cubans are devoting to our exchange program. And what we want to do is bring young, well, they don't have to be young, I'm old, but people together along environmental, to do best practices, to share the science and thinking about environmental issues. Obviously, how do we deal with racism? Because Cuba deals with racism differently than we do in this country. So many different ways to put people in the same room so they can have discussions and learn from each other. So I'm a part of the Sister City movement. I guess I'm the founder, co-founder of it. And that's what I do.
Great. Thank you so much, Lisa. And
Mhm.
now I'd like to ask another youngster to introduce herself, Karen Wald. And I know that her daughter will be delivering her message, but Karen, would you like to say hi to us? I think you're on mute.
Richard, I don't think she's connected.
Oh, okay. I see her.
I'm not, Richard?
Yes,
This is Sierra.
I know. Okay, if she's not connected, then Sierra, why don't you go ahead and introduce your mother and yourself, and also tell us what lessons that you or she have learned from Cuba. Sierra, can you hear me?
Richard?
Yes. Can you hear me
Sorry, sorry, my internet connection is very unstable. I apologize. It's why I don't have my video on, because sometimes that helps. So, can you hear me?
Yes. Would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself and your mother?
Yes, but just wanted to say, if I cut out, can you wave at me, Richard, so that I know that you may have missed what I said?
I will. I'll wave.
Okay. So hi, everyone. My name is Sierra, and I am Karen Wald's daughter, among other things. I'm actually going to just read what my mom wrote. She condensed over 40 years of working in Cuba and for Cuba, with Cuba, into 6 lessons, which, if you know my mom, was a very, very challenging task. I think both in written form and orally, she has a lot to say. So I'm very proud of her for trying to just condense all of this learning into 6 lessons. That being said, I'm just going to go ahead and read them. Again, this is a reminder that this is from Karen, who first went to Cuba in 1969 and is a founding member of the Venceremos Brigade. So, lesson 1. Approaching Havana Harbor on December 25th, 1968, on a freighter carrying cows from Canada, a huge billboard came into sight. The rebellion gave us the right as well as the duty to make the revolution. This was the 10th anniversary of Fidel's rebels' triumphant defeat of the bloody Batista dictatorship. And because it was always referred to as the Revolutionary War, I always thought of those years of fighting as the revolution. But this was a new twist. Having won the rebellion, the revolutionaries were about to start the enormous task of remaking the economic, political, social, and cultural landscape of their country. They were starting the revolution. So that was the first lesson from Karen. The second, because almost everything written about the Cuban Revolution painted the Cubans involved on one side or the other as either devils or angels, heroes or demons, what really hit me in my first days and weeks in the country was the astounding fact that these were just normal human beings. That was an important lesson, because what came on the heels of that realization was, if they can do it, we can do it. Number 3, one of Fidel's goals was to provide health care for everyone in the country, especially those who had never had access to doctors and hospitals before. Part of this involved setting up polyclinics in every municipality. Fidel had already said that the revolution wasn't something that was going to be given to the people, but rather something they would be given the opportunity to make themselves. And building and staffing these new clinics was a task people enthusiastically undertook. Sitting in one of them soon after my arrival, a big poster on the wall urging people to donate blood gave me my third lesson. It said, "We don't practice charity, we practice solidarity." Later on, one of the Cuban leaders, Jose Ramon Balaguer, talking about Cuban aid to Angola, put it another way. "We don't give to others what we have in abundance, we share the little we have." Number 4, the 60s version of the women's movement in the US that had begun shortly before my arrival in Cuba had been largely verbal, such as not using male terms to describe activities of both men and women, and visual. Women didn't have to shave their legs, wear clothes and hairstyles pleasing to men, and things like that. So in many ways, Cuban women seemed backward to the young leftists among us who thought of ourselves as quote unquote advanced. It seems like a contradiction to see women doing guard duty in their neighborhoods with AK-47 rifles slung over their shoulders, but their hair wrapped in curlers. It took a while to realize how far Cuban women, who rarely went to school beyond the first few grades and had played almost no role in government or the economy before 1959, had come. While we, quote unquote, leftists focused on the superficial, in their first 10 years of revolution, Cuban women had already achieved the right to equal schooling and equal pay for equal work, and a family code, which is a legal part of their constitution, that legislated, I want to repeat that, legislated that men were responsible for half the workload in caring for home and children. That was my emphasis as Sierra, not my mom's, because that still amazes me. Putting the last part into practice, of course, took a lot more time and persuasion, but they had come a lot farther than we had, despite the rhetoric. So my mom writes about being in Cuba in late 60s and early 70s. I just want to say that I grew up there from 1981 to 91. And even though I love the fact that it was part of the family code, it was supposed to be legal, that responsibilities were equal. That still was a struggle when I was growing up. And I'm pretty sure that, you know, if you ask folks today, it's still a work in progress. But the fact that it's actually something that people voted on to be part of the legal foundation of their countries is still incredible. Okay, so this is back to Karen's number 5. The contradictions between what we were taught about Cuba and the US and what each of us who went there found to be the truth in practice were so great that I tended to ignore some of it until hit with the enormity of some of the contradictions. An example of this was religion. The conventional wisdom in the US and elsewhere was that Fidel had wiped out religion, that no one was allowed to openly practice. There have been whole books written documenting how erroneous that particular propaganda was, but it didn't really hit me until I moved into a new neighborhood in 1985, and one of my neighbors was the vice president of the Ecumenical Council, which was later renamed the Council of Churches. Through her, I learned that there were many religions actively practiced in Cuba, contradicting the media outside Cuba, which pretended that there was either no religion allowed, because the Cuban Constitution declared the country atheist, or acknowledged only Catholicism. And just a side note, the Cuban Constitution changed the identification as an atheist country in 1992. What I learned was that while there were some people who still declared themselves Catholics and regularly attended church, the numbers attributed to that religion were greatly inflated by the fact that in most Afro-Cuban religions, adaptations, often forced, brought, so religions that Africans brought with them when they were taken to Cuba, they were forced to assimilate. And so people baptized their children in a Catholic church, but thereafter practiced their own religion. There were also a number of Protestant religions, including Baptists, Methodists, Episcopalians, Seventh-day Adventists, Jehovah's Witnesses, as well as Reformed, Conservative, and Orthodox Jews. There are also Muslims and Buddhists scattered around the island. When the first pope visited Cuba, he used the Afro-Cuban inflated numbers to claim Catholicism as the dominant religion in the country. But when he met with various religious leaders of all faiths, he did not include Babalaos and other representatives of Afro-Cuban religions, whom he never acknowledged. Even today, you still read misleading reports about Cuba listing Catholicism as the dominant religion in the country. And last, but definitely not least, the lesson that Karen wanted to share is that the single most important lesson of the Cuban Revolution is the need for unity. Whether we go there for academic conferences or solidarity brigades, Cubans are constantly pointing out to foreign visitors that they could never have succeeded in gaining their independence from Spain or the real independence from economic misery if they hadn't learned to work together. Unity is the greatest lesson those outside Cuba are still trying to learn. And that is the message from Karen. Thank you all very much for listening. And I am so sorry, I can't actually stay on the rest of the call. But Richard, if you have a similar event, I'd be more than happy to share my own lessons as someone who grew up there from 8 to 18.
I'm going to ask you to share one lesson, and that is, how was the 26th of July movement taught in Cuba when you were growing up there?
So it was part of my history class, for sure. Well, this is not a quick answer, Richard. I mean, it was part of a basic history in all grades. So I started in 4th grade, and then I graduated from high school there. And it took different forms, obviously, different years. You know, in 4th grade, it was very much textbook had pictures and images from the Moncada, and you know, you had the main historical figures that participated in it. And so, you know, it was, basic education where you were told about something and you read about something. And I think that the difference for me and for other Cuban youth was that because there were still folks alive who had been part of that movement, we also got to talk to them and hear from them personally. And for a lot of, I can't say us because I didn't have, Cuban family members, but my friends had grandparents who had been part of this movement. And so we actually, it was part of them growing up hearing about these stories. So I think that's it's an amazing thing to have living history. And because the 26th of July movement had sort of a static piece in history, but also was part of what the daily experience and fabric of the revolution was. It was also just a way of being. So knowing that it's your duty to fight for social justice. It's your duty to see others as just as valuable as you. The message that fighting for the future of your country is your responsibility was something that was also instilled in us as young people. And not only framed as it's your duty and responsibility, but really this is your country. And so whatever you're contributing and what you're learning is so that you can be the best that you can be and work so that the society is better. So it was really that message of fighting for leaving the country, the society, this world better than when you found it. And so I think that, there was the basic educational piece about learning about the 26th of July movement and that date and how it contributed to the rest of the revolution, but it was also how it influenced the way we were raised and the work that we did and how we conducted ourselves. So yeah, sorry, that took a little bit longer. Obviously, it's kind of a big question.
Thank you, Sarah. Just as an aside, for those of you who are not familiar with Human Agenda, we have led 6 emulation tours to Cuba, and we've always gone on religious visas. Religion in Cuba is practiced throughout the island in many different forms. And so it's important to recognize that Cuba did recognize that the freedom of conscience is something that cannot be taken away from individuals. I'd like to now ask Dana to please introduce yourself and also tell us the lessons from Cuba that you learned on the recent trip.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, Richard. Thank you for extending the invitation. My name is Dana Peterson. Can y'all hear me okay?
Yes.
Cool. All right. I'm joining you today from Western Massachusetts, where I live in Amherst. I'm a worker owner at AORTA. AORTA stands for the Anti-Oppression Resource and Training Alliance, and we are a worker cooperative of facilitators and trainers dedicated to strengthening movements for social justice and solidarity economy projects through education, training, and planning. And I traveled with the Human Agenda on the emulation tour to Cuba this year in January. And my trip was sponsored by the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives, who had teamed up with the Human Agenda to send some folks to learn about Cuban economy, specifically cooperatives in the Cuban economy. It's kind of wild given how this year has unfolded. That trip, which just happened in January, seems so long ago and so far away now. But it's still something I think about, often, maybe even every day. I wanted to share just a little bit about what I learned about housing while I was there. We had just an incredible itinerary where we visited cooperatives. We heard from scholars and academics and folks who were in the assembly and all different kinds of folks, community workers and things like that. So I learned a ton. But one thing that's really stayed with me is a little bit of info about how the housing works there. I don't know a lot, but I'll share with you what really stayed with me, which is that, Cubans can and do own their own homes. The housing is controlled by the state, and it's heavily subsidized by the state. And the most interesting thing that I learned is that the people are not permitted to own more than 2 homes. And this was very striking to me because it's actually completely perpendicular to how housing is approached in the US, right? And, it seems to me that real estate is one of the major ways that people in the US accumulate wealth disproportionately and drive the inequality divide in our country. And real estate tycoons accumulate political power alongside that wealth that they accumulate from the real estate market. And so in Cuba, my impression is that the housing is viewed as a basic need, and it's a basic need that the state tries to meet for all Cuban people. Most of the homes that I saw as we were kind of moving about, were very modest and indeed reflect some of the difficulties that the island faces regarding accessing resources, in large part because of the blockade, and probably also a function of being an island, as many Caribbean nations face, right? So, their homes are not, they're modest, they're functional. And I know that the island has some struggles with keeping enough housing available for folks and keeping it in good repair. Nevertheless, it's a priority that they house all Cuban people. And just kind of encountering Cuba's approach to housing really brought for me into sharp relief the situation, how grotesque and inhumane the housing situation in the US is, to be honest, especially given the exorbitant amount of resources we have as a country, right? And it just kind of really reaffirms my conviction that, in our country is actually fundamentally about maximizing profit and control and not about the common good. And it's a very different approach and perspective towards what housing is and how it should function in relation to people's well-being, and in relation to wealth as it's conceived of here in the US. When I think about it, I don't know if we could, in fact, emulate Cuba's housing situation here in the US, but there's no reason why we couldn't try something radically different than what we're currently doing, And I think Cuba shows that there are other ways to approach housing, among many other things. While I was there, I often heard people refer to the revolution in the present. So it was like the revolution wasn't a thing that happened, it's a thing that's happening, And in fact, while we were there in January, if I recall correctly, they were in the process of rewriting or ratifying a new constitution or update to the constitution or something like that. And I was just completely blown away, right? Because here in the US, there's a sort of sacrality to those documents that prevents us from struggling with them and reimagining radically how we might structure our society. And there it was like, oh yeah, these things need to change. It doesn't work. We're gonna do something different. And I think one of the biggest takeaways for me is the very nowness of how they think about the revolution. It's now, it's present, it's ongoing, and there's a willingness to really continue to push for the common good of most people in a Cuban society. And that was evident in many encounters that I had, but today the top of my mind is how that manifests specifically in how they approach housing. So that's my little tidbit. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Dana. I just wanted to add a quick comment about housing. We live here in Silicon Valley where we have 10,000 homeless people or more. And in Cuba, I've never seen a homeless person in all of my trips. People are taken care of, although the housing, of course, is very inferior, largely because of the blockade. I remember meeting with the president of the Alamar Agricultural Cooperative, and he said, there is no Home Depot in Cuba. And it's true. It's very difficult to find the parts that can allow you to upkeep your home. But even with that, 85% of Cubans do own their homes, unlike the United States, and other people are buying their homes. And so it is a staple really of the Cuban economy. Back in 1961, Cuba had to make the hard choice whether to invest in healthcare and education or in things like homes, and they chose healthcare and education. And it's really helped them a lot over the last decades, in my opinion. So I'd like to move on and please ask Derek, could you please tell us what you do, where you live, and the lesson that you've learned from Cuba?
Sure. So I'm a radical activist trying to learn my way online in San Jose, California, and went to Cuba in 2017 with Human Agenda and took away two real key learnings from that trip. And one kind of points to what Dana was talking about right there at the end when she talked about rewriting the Constitution. And what I took away from my trip was I could have a conversation with almost anyone I encountered, and they understood economic concepts and political concepts. And so they could give a critique of capitalism, and they could give a critique of the different political systems. And pointing back to what Dana said, I would be scared to have a conversation in America about changing the Constitution because people are so illiterate about politics and political systems. And along the same lines, we are just being hosed by capitalism, and yet there's very little critique and very little understanding of what's driving all of that among the American population. So that was one takeaway. And then the other takeaway I want to present is being very aware, very conscious of the embargo that had been going on for roughly 60 years. And it was very obvious in terms of technology because technology was recent and technology was primarily driven from American innovation and manufacturing. And so technology seemed to be a real vacuum in Cuba when I was there. And it just made me realize how much they have had to struggle harder in order to overcome the embargo. And yet they didn't hold it against us. They would welcome us with open arms, have wonderful conversations with us, open their hearts to us, and tell us what's going on. They could have very easily have done like I would suspect a lot of Americans would do, which would be to be hateful, resentful, seek revenge, and things like that. They were completely on board with, you know, we get the system you're living under is doing this to us, not you, and very open to us as individuals. And so I was very grateful for that and very touched by that.
Thank you, Derek. And now we're going to move to Sharat Lin. Sharat, would you like to tell us where you live, what you do, and what lessons that you learned? I know you're going to be speaking today about democracy in Cuba.
Yes, so thank you very much, Richard, for organizing this. And my name is Sharat Lin. I live in San Jose. I'm with the San Jose Peace and Justice Center. I'm doing some work on the reality tours or emulation tours with Human Agenda. I'm also with the Initiative for Equality and the Dr. Martin Luther King Legacy Committee. I'm a political economist as well as a medical person by training, and so of course what Cuba has done in the medical field and for the whole world is really of tremendous interest to me. But I'm going to talk today about the elections. You know, here in this country, you hear over and over again that Cuba is this dictatorship, and they speak about it as if there are no elections, people have no say in the governance of their country. And I went there in February of last year because on February 24th, Cuba held a referendum. So not only do they have elections for elected office, but from time to time, for maybe once in a couple of decades, as conditions change in a country, there is a need, there's a recognition that also values change. I mean, for example, there was a time when gay people didn't have recognition, and values change. Whether it's in the U.S. or in Cuba or in any other place, and so the Constitution needs to change to reflect that. And so on February 24th of last year, Cuba held a referendum for a new constitution, and so I went there to cover that election. But what's important about the referendum is not what happened on election day. What is important is the process by which that was done, and that process began 8 months earlier with a proposal. The Legislative Assembly, the National Assembly, determined that it was time to revise the Constitution again, and it would have to be revised and then submitted to the electorate. And by the way, in Cuba, the voting age is 16. So they have more confidence in young people than we do here. And the decision of the National Assembly triggered a process of, first of all, having a committee to make a draft and then submit that draft for public discussion over a 4-month period. So we're talking about from the spring of 2018 through about August, there were 4 months where public meetings were held in workplaces and schools, in neighborhoods throughout the country. And so we're talking about something like 8,000 meetings taking place all over the country, and people making comments and making suggestions. And these suggestions were recorded. Something over 1 million suggestions were actually recorded in this process. And these were digested into a few thousand, distinct changes that were written into the second draft of the Constitution, or I should say it was the final draft. And so that was really a remarkable process, because you see, I mean, just contrast that with the way that we vote on propositions here in California. First of all, not every state has propositions. So in California, somebody or some entity drafts a proposition. They go through some legal due process, and then it gets put on the ballot. But you and I, as voters, have no say in the content of those propositions. We cannot make suggestions and say that, well, the way that it is drafted actually has some complications, or maybe there's a legal issue, or we don't have that process of modifying something that's put before the voters. In Cuba's case, these million comments were wrapped into the final draft, and so that draft was already the product of a national consensus. Okay, so there was democracy in just coming up with the draft, and then when it actually went to a vote on February 24th of 2019, I had the chance to observe that process. And it's very similar. The polling places are very similar to the polling places here. We don't have, Cuba doesn't have electronic machines. Everything's on paper. And people go to a roster. There are poll workers. Poll workers look up the voter on the roster, and then they verify the name, and then they hand the voter a ballot. The voter votes the ballot, puts it into a ballot box, so it's a secret ballot. There are school children there who are the official guardians of the ballot box, and so they stand there. They take half-hour shifts, but there's always 1 or 2 school children there watching that ballot continuously, that ballot box. And then at the end of the day, of course, the ballots are counted in the precinct by all of the poll workers. Outsiders can observe that process, and so it's all transparent. It's all transparent, and there are procedures and all that stuff that I don't have time to go into. So it's all very rigorous and according to the law. There's no possibility of fraud. And when the ballots were counted, there was a definite difference in the there were dissenting votes. There was a protest vote. Some of the protest votes were just simply people submitting blank ballots. And but in the end, because of the consensus process of 4 months of these meetings, the Constitution was approved by something like 86% of the votes that were cast. And I call this a not just simply an electoral democracy. I call this a democracy of that works towards consensus rather than division. It's definitely democratic, but it means that when everything is said and done, there is a national consensus that this is something, that the vast majority, and it's not a 50-50. It ends up being something where the vast majority of the people think that this is good for the country. And so this I found to be a remarkable process, and it just shows that so much of what is propagated here in this country is an absolute lie. That this is a of all countries needs to bring democracy to Cuba. So I think that's what I have to say.
Thank you, Sharat. And, I have personally witnessed municipal elections in Cuba through People's Power that was established in 1976. No American basically knows that People's Power exists and that there are free elections at every level of government in Cuba. But let's move on. Greg Miller, would you like to introduce yourself and also tell us what lessons and experiences you have had in Cuba?
Yeah, I'm a retired RN, worked as mostly as a hospital staff RN for about 30 years, active in California Nurses Association, and also I'm active in the single payer movement, Medicare for All movement. And I was able to visit Cuba in 2011 and 2015. Well, 2011, I went with a group led by Vic and Barb Ulmer that was looking at the organic gardens that Cuba had created throughout the island, in the city and the country. And of course, these were created to address the shortages of food during the special period that happened during the 90s. And they still exist. And I was astounded at how cheap the produce was and how fresh it was and how available it was for people. And the second trip I was with, trip that you led, Richard, with the looking at the worker-owned cooperatives. And so one thing I saw, that impressed me was, of course, how they rebuilt this huge healthcare system with hospitals and clinics and doctors, like I would say neighborhood doctors' offices, or what they call consultorios, where the health workers, and they include a doctor, at least a doctor and a nurse in each one of these little offices, they live in the neighborhood. They really know the people, their neighbors, their health situation, and they try to address any problems they might have. That really impressed me. Then that they actually visit people's houses and find out how they're doing and what their needs might be, and try to address those needs. So that is such stark contrast to the United States. So Cuba, I understood that Cuba spends about 50% of its budget, I guess it's government budget, on health and education. And put another way, they spend about $1,000 per person on health care. In the United States, we spend over $11,000 per person on health care. And then you want to contrast, the quality of care and the health status of people in the two countries. They are as good as or better as folks in the United States in terms of their life expectancy and infant mortality and maternal mortality. So in a second trip, I was able to visit the the Latin American Medical School, or ELAM, Escuela Latino America de Medicina, I think is how you say it, which opened in 1999. They have trained 30,000 doctors from 100 countries. So this is another important part of their healthcare, is that they address, they're not just, they address the needs of the most vulnerable people in their country and then around the world. And that sort of like fits into a whole different concept of foreign policy than we are familiar with, right? They say, hey, let's, help people get ahead around the world. Let's create systems that make sure people's needs are met, and work in other countries to also guarantee that. And so, I was very much impressed with that. They had some students there that are from the United States that were had pledged to go back to serve underserved areas in the United States. So that was very impressive. Another thing is that the COVID-19 response has been much more robust, for testing and treatment. And they've had I understand they have a total of about, 21 cases per 100,000 in Cuba. In the United States, we have 1,000 per 100,000. The richest country in the world with all our resources, not under conditions of blockade. So what's the problem here? I'm constantly, it's a thing where you're comparing what I'm familiar with the United States and what they have been able to achieve in Cuba under really difficult circumstances. So they also developed medications, antiviral medications, medications for the treatment of diabetic ulcers and cancer, and homeopathic medications. Homeopathy is actually part of their healthcare. They've sort of been integrated into their healthcare system. The idea of helping your body to your immune system to prevent illness, right? Is part of the idea of that. So basically, the basic principles that I took from Cuba is that their system is about restoring and protecting health, and it meshes with the overall system of education, food production, and distribution. It's not like a totally separate thing. And they have the whole, they have it's based on democratic planning, as Sharat was talking about, and other folks have been talking about, to address the needs of the people. And they help the underserved and the most vulnerable people first. So I'm of course always comparing it, as I say, to the U.S. situation. And I'm thinking, and I'm advocate for Medicare for all. And I've often, whenever I talk about Medicare for all, I say this Medicare for all would allow us in the United States to create a rational system, okay, a rational healthcare system and a system to promote health. Because Medicare is a democratically controlled system, which has power to limit the profits, limit the costs of healthcare, and can visualize a system which is there to promote people's health and restore people's health, and not, not just to make money for corporations. Because in our country, it's about corporate subsidizing corporations. That's our principle in this country, right? So I'm really, I just have to have much respect for Cuba and what they've achieved in healthcare. So they're definitely, we should emulate them. And that's basically all I have to say at the moment.
Thank you, Greg. And I think all of us who have gone to Cuba to look at the new worker cooperatives in Cuba know that the Cuban government is subsidizing cooperatives, not corporations. They're giving 10-year periods of leasing land and buildings to allow new industrial and service cooperatives to exist in the last 8 years. They've been wildly successful. And the reason that Human Agenda has gone there in particular, and also to Mondragon, is because they incorporate the values of Human Agenda, which are democracy, equity, cooperation, kindness, and sustainability. I'm going to talk at the end about the Alamar Cooperative because I think it's really instructive of what Cuba offers to the world. But before we do that, Rachel, would you like to introduce yourself and explain what lessons that you felt you brought back from Cuba?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Rachel. I'm also from San Jose, California, and I went on the 2018 emulation tour. So I'm a social worker, and I was interested in seeing what kind of social services Cuba had and kind of contrasting them with the ones we have here. And as we were going, I think as Richard mentioned, he told me, you know, look and see if you see anybody who's homeless. And I did, and I looked and there were no homeless people there. There was, and contrasted with the county I work in, which is a very rich county and has a really horrible homelessness problem. It was really striking to me. We also went to see the healthcare, which was, we got to meet mothers and fathers whose kids had developmental delays, and they were being sponsored by the government to go 5 days a week to work with their kids to make sure their kids were on track. And I couldn't think of any similar program here. It's always a struggle here. We also went to visit adult day center. So it's like a senior center, which we have like very, very similar programs here, which I've referred people to. But what I noticed is here, there's two levels. There's the government subsidized centers, which are generally in like older buildings. They're just not as good, and they're always operating under restraint. And then there's, if you could pay for it, you can go to very luxurious, nice centers. But in Cuba, everybody was accessing the same resources. There wasn't a two-tiered system. Everybody was in it together. And I think overall what really struck me is, you know, we live in the richest society in the world, and yet there's not the will to solve these social problems. You know, if we took, you know, half the money used on the military, we could solve homelessness, we could fix the schools, we could start an actual healthcare system that would treat everybody equally, and we don't do it. And yet in Cuba, which has very limited resources, especially with the embargo, they see a problem and the will is there to solve it. And I think sometimes, you know, especially for me, like living in a capitalist society, you can get the idea that people are inherently selfish and that people just don't want to help each other. It's not, you know, it's not what people want to do. And I think what I really took away from going to Cuba and seeing people there is that they did want to help each other. You know, people were in it together, and they weren't demoralized, you know, even under such, you know, under restrictions and circumstances that I would find hard to live under. It was because they believed in each other. And, you know, I don't see the difference between Americans and Cubans besides the political system that they're living under. So to me, it was really, it was really helpful, and it helped me kind of see an example of all these things I think would make the world better. And then you go to Cuba and you see them being implemented. You see like, oh yes, it can be better than this. So I really found that's what I took from Cuba, basically. See what I saw there and bring it back here and try to encourage people who are maybe, you know, you see how hard it is to change things and sometimes you feel like giving up, but it's not impossible, right? So that's what I took.
All right, thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.
When we came back 2 years ago, we developed a list of 10 different policies that are incredible in Cuba, including a human rights-based constitution where everybody has the right, including the rights of nature, to the rights to housing, rest, education, healthcare, uh, basic human rights. Also, of course, we haven't really talked about the education system in Cuba. And Karen Wald, who is with us, wrote a book many years ago called The Children of Che. As we know, the literacy rate in Cuba is 99.7. There's almost nobody who cannot read and write in Cuba. It's the highest in the Western Hemisphere. It's a society where there are no guns sold, and so there's very little gun violence or physical violence, period. I'll share a story with one person who went with us to Cuba. He got up at 6 o'clock and was jogging, and he jogged behind a Cuban woman, and he said he was shocked because the woman didn't turn around. She felt safe enough to have somebody jogging right up behind her without having to turn around to see who it might be. So I think all of us who have been to Cuba can really recognize the fact that Cuba is an extremely safe and secure society to live in and to visit. Also, if we look at the issues around the environment, we have visited many reserves in Cuba, and we know that as of now, Cuba has the lowest carbon footprint of any country on earth. Part of that may have to do with the blockade and the low level of consumption of Cubans, but there also is a systematic effort to improve their environment. I'd like to just add what I think is a vision for the future, and that was a visit that we've made. I know that Derek has been there, Sharat, many of us, when we visited the Alamar Agricultural Cooperative, which is 60 kilometers outside of Havana. In that cooperative, the difference in pay between the highest and lowest paid is 2 to 1. It's a cooperative that has been democratically run, controlled, and owned for a couple of decades now in Cuba. The work week is 33 hours per week, so that the workers actually have the time to be human beings, which is a major part of the vision of Human Agenda, that people actually have reduced work hours and have time to spend with family, friends, engaged in the community, lifelong education, and to do the things that make us fully human. Cuba is a leader in also not overworking the Cuban people, unlike the United States and many other countries. So to me, Alamar is an example. When you get off work, you have time to do the things that you would like to do. You have free healthcare, you have free education. Transportation is primarily by bus, and you pay a nickel to get on that bus, or less, sometimes a penny to get on that bus in Cuba. Transportation is not highly developed in Cuba, but it's sufficient, it's adequate, and people do not pay a lot. As I said, 85% of the people already own their home, so they're not making house payments, and they're not burdened by educational debt, by mortgage debt, by credit card debt. They have no debt. And that's really huge in terms of just how you live from day to day, knowing that you're not in debt to some bank or corporation that's taking your money. So to me, the Alamar Agricultural Cooperative is an example of the place that I would hope that our society can take us someday. We are so far from that, but we need to move in that direction. We need to create institutions that are cooperative and equitable, like banks that are public banks, like cooperatives that are worker-owned and democratic, like public education, like public Medicare for all. So I know that all of us are working on changing our society and moving in a more democratic and equitable direction. And I think the Black Lives Matter movement tells us, you know, we need to double down on our activities and really increase our activity to promote new institutions in the United States of America. So with that, I'd like to ask if there are other people. And Tony, I think you wanted to share with us a recent resolution in San Francisco. Is that correct?
Yes. Can you hear me, folks?
Yes.
Okay. I wanted to first off just thank everybody. I know very little about the human agenda, except that I vaguely have heard of it. I've been involved in living and working in San Francisco and the East Bay, and I also spent time back east. And a little bit of history. I was a member of the 1st Venceremos Brigade in 1969, and I'm one of the co-founders of the network on Cuba. So I've had a long experience with Cuba. I've been many times as well. I'm somewhat retired bookseller activist. I work on different things, but Cuba has always been, going back to before 1969, very close to my heart. And I learned a lot every time I go. Every time I go, I learn something new. So I wanted to thank this webinar, and I'm glad that I learned about it. And I feel really happy to be celebrating this 67th anniversary of the attack on Moncada. And I'm just very impressed with what I've heard and seen today. And yes, I do want to talk about a couple of things that have happened that I've been involved with in somewhat. First off is this resolution that was passed by the San Francisco Board of Supervisors this week. And I was, while not directly involved with it, I was asked to attend the meeting, which I did for a while, but the meeting went on and on and on. And finally, at about 8 o'clock at night, the Board of Supervisors of San Francisco City and County unanimously passed a resolution calling for San Francisco to collaborate and work and to end with Cuba, with Cuban doctors and scientists. And it's a detailed resolution, which I got, and but it's a very, very big step forward. There have been resolutions in other parts of the country, but this one is pretty far reaching, if I do say so myself. And I can get that to people. I've in the chat area, I've listed my phone number and email, and I'll gladly send that information to anyone that would like to get it, including the text of the resolution, which is pretty amazing. I think a number of us thought that the resolution would pass by a majority, but to get a complete, everybody on the board voting for it. I mean, San Francisco is a progressive town, and there's a progressive force within the Board of Supervisors, but there are other people who are also liberals, shall we say, but they're more corporate liberals and more tied to the gentrification process in a negative sense, and that the tech industry, the whole 9 yards. But to have this this resolution passed unanimously is really a step forward, and I don't want to brag or toot the horn of San Francisco too much, but I think in some ways San Francisco is sort of leading the way in a really necessary process about getting resolutions out and done. So I just wanted to say that. Now, secondly, on August 2nd, which is next Sunday, I'm going to be moderating a program called Cuba, This is What Medical Internationalism Looks Like. Excuse me? Hello?
Go ahead.
Somebody said something I wanted to, okay. It's called Cuba, This is What Medical Internationalism Looks Like. I'll be moderating the program with Dr. Abraham Vela, who's a graduate of the Latin American School of Medicine, a few years ago, and he practices medicine in Southern California, thanks to his education and graduation from the Elam. And then also Gail Walker from Pastors for Peace will be with us as well. And one of the things that she'll be talking about is the extension that Pastors for Peace historically for quite some time now has been involved with the selection of people from the United States to go to Cuba for medical school. And they've extended the application process for next year. Hopefully things will be much better in terms of COVID and all that, and we'll see a delegation of people from the States going to it. So Gail will also speak to that and give a little bit of history about how her father got involved, which was mentioned here earlier. And again, I don't have any, like I said, I left my email and phone number in the chat box, and anybody's interested in attending this webinar, it's going to be starting at 10:30 Pacific Standard Time, and we'll go for a couple of hours basically. And so again, thank you all, and please, any information you have that you want to share about this, I mean, this is a series of webinars across the country and across the globe that have been happening. And of course, part of this is, you know, and I would urge people, if they haven't done so already, is go to this website called cubanobel.org, and there's a petition calling for the awarding of the Henry Reed Medical Brigade the Nobel Prize in 2120. And so thank you very much again, and a really wonderful event today. Thanks a lot.
Tony, were you at the 50th anniversary of the brigade in Havana last year?
No.
Okay, I went.
No, I had a choice between going to Cuba to that or to the book fair, and it was a very hard decision. But I have historically been involved in book selling, and it's a wonderful event. Every February it happens in Havana, and then it goes to the provinces later. But it's a big deal, and it's not just selling books, but it's a whole bunch of cultural activities and a lot of other things. But a number of friends of mine did go to that, on that brigade. But yeah, I heard it was pretty interesting.
Yes. So we have about 10 minutes left. We'd like to finish this.
Thank you.
Within, you're welcome. We'd like to finish this within 90 minutes, but we do have 10 minutes left. Is there anybody that has not spoken yet who would like to share a lesson from Cuba?
Rita, go ahead.
Thank you, Derek. Hi, everyone. It's exciting to be collaborating on all this. As you have heard partly from Tony, and you may be aware, the Saving Lives campaign is a strong national effort that developed this year. I want to encourage everyone to go to their website, please. I'm an active part of it. I'm one of the leaders in the resolutions section of this national movement. And I was part of the committee that passed the San Francisco resolution. We started it here in Richmond, California, where we passed the first one. And essentially, why it's so important is we are not only asking, of course, that the embargo be ended or at least relaxed for now, but what we're saying is that to save lives, we need scientific and medical collaboration with the Cubans because of their advances. And it's getting a very warm, strong response, unanimous everywhere we've passed it. So, and the ambassador in DC, Jose Cabañas, is very supportive, and it's already been in the Cuban press, etc. So San Jose has not yet taken up the resolution. It's really a straightforward process. I already put in the chat a copy of the resolution, and I put a document that I developed to guide people in passing resolutions wherever they're located. We have people from all over the country involved, and there's a committee that meets every 2 weeks. So I put my email in the chat, and I would welcome any responses if you want to be involved. And separate from that, you know, my many trips to Cuba, I'll be brief, but I think what's so astounding to me is their determination to share their solidarity with the people of Africa. One of the biotech vice ministers of public health, when I got to talk with him at a conference, I was there with Infomed. I know you folks in the South Bay know Infomed US, David Wald, Presente. And I was there representing them for a conference on healthcare. And this vice minister, he said what he wanted to sit and talk with me about was their work in South Africa and how they helped end apartheid. And I just think, you know, with all the challenges in Cuba, their deep international solidarity is so strong. And so whatever we can do to stand with them, as I say, the Saving Lives campaign and the Nobel Peace campaign are two ways for us to do something important now. So thank you.
Thank you, Rita. Anybody else like to share? Okay, well, since nobody wants to share, is there anybody who has spoken who would like to share a last thought before we end today's program? Lisa?
You're on mute.
Thank you. I'm from Pittsburgh, and I see a lot of you are from California. Of course, I'm familiar with Infomed and all, Dave and all those. There is the resolutions are very, very important, because what it does is it puts your city on record for taking a position against the blockade. And so really, they're not that hard to get. All of your city council and local people do want to do something for their constituencies. And in the United States, you can have, you have resolutions passed by city councils all the time on all sorts of issues. So getting one for Cuba isn't as hard as people might think it is. And I think it's very, very important to accumulate these official statements of desire, of policy that the people want. But I also want to say, in Pittsburgh, we have a group called Global Links. And Global Links works with the World Health Organization, and they work with the Cuban Ministry of Health. And right now, they have been working with the Ministry of Health, and they have identified $10 million worth of aid that Cuba needs. And they have the capacity and the licensing to send it. What they need is $180,000 per container, and they have 10 containers ready to go. So given the thing about COVID, and given how important it is to support the Cuban medical system, not only in their fight against COVID, but in the international solidarity that they show with all of us worldwide, trying to get people more aware of helping us do fundraising for something that's very, very physical. Getting these 10 containers to Cuba is really important. And it's something that we have been working on here in Pittsburgh, but you can imagine with all of the funding necessities that we all have for local work, it's hard to get that right now. But I just wanted to raise that awareness that this group called Global Links, they have a globallinks.org. They have a website. It's important because Trump is talking about pulling out of the World Health Organization. And Global Links also works in all of Central America. They work in Guatemala, Honduras, all through Latin and Central America, Haiti. We haven't even mentioned Haiti. So I think that if people could also look at helping us do a concrete action of actually making sure this medical aid is delivered. It's one of the things the caravans, Pastors for Peace, we always took aid. I mean, it's how InfoMed got started. It was the absolutely making sure that no blockade was going to keep us from providing these necessities. And Global Links is just one way that we're trying to continue. So I just wanted people to be also aware of that work. And I very much would like to know more about the human agenda. Richard, this is my first day meeting you or hearing about these initiatives. And I think in solidarity, everybody that can come forward, the more we can share, the more we can know about each other, the more we can network. This is just so critical in this moment. So please, Richard, if you would do me the honors of try to send me stuff or keep in contact with me or let me know what you're doing, because I definitely know that not only myself, but people in my area, we are all looking, especially those of us that are under COVID, that we're alone at home with our COVID stuff. We need to be able to reach out, and seeing your faces today, I know you're not in my room, but you are in my heart. And I really, really, really want to thank you for that, because I need a little uplift, and you all have provided it, and I really want to thank you for that.
Thank you, Lisa. I think that's a real fitting end to
Sorry.
program today. Do we have one more speaker?
No, this is Tony again. Lisa, please, can we connect? We haven't talked in about 15 or 16 years, I believe. And yeah. I'm interested in this globallinks.org, please.
All right. All right.
Thank you a lot. Okay.
Richard, I have a question. Where are you? Are you in San Jose?
Yes.
Okay, can you give me a connection with you somehow? It's a miracle that I found this. So
yes.
I'm in Stanford, yeah.
Oh, you live in Stanford, awesome. I'm going to put my email address in the chat room, but it's very simple, richhobbs@msn.com. richhobbs@msn.com. And
I better look at it because I don't hear very well. So I better look at it. If you put it in the chat, I can copy it.
Yeah, my email address is there. Human Agenda has several different programs. One is emulation tours, where we were intending to go to 4 countries this year. Now we're going to none after our January emulation tour. Sharat Lin was working on a trip to Bhutan to understand the gross national happiness approach to full human rights in the small Himalayan country of Bhutan. John DeGraff, who has historically been the head of the Take Back Your Time movement, was attempting to put together an emulation tour to the Netherlands and now to Finland, which is considered the happiest country on earth right now by United Nations indicators. We were intending to be in Mondragon, Spain earlier this month, but that did not happen. All of a sudden, Spain had an enormous outbreak in the spring, and so we had to cancel our fully developed Mondragon emulation tour. And we're also planning a trip to Cuba again in January, another emulation tour, looking at best practices in Cuba, always looking at worker-owned cooperatives, the new worker-owned cooperatives as an important initiative in Cuba. So those trips for now are all canceled. But in addition, Human Agenda is working to develop worker-owned cooperatives. I'm an immigration attorney, and we have collected about $200,000 to give to immigrants who are currently in removal proceedings in Santa Clara County. And we've distributed $130,000 to immigrants. We represent them in removal proceedings, primarily people from Central America and certain states of Mexico who are escaping persecution and poverty in their homeland. And then we put on a number of events. One event that's coming up is called Break the Mold. We've decided to call it not Bend the Arc, which is what our district attorney recently called his reforms, which are very slow, but rather break the mold, because we need some real structural change in the United States of America. We can no longer accept the slow reform path to change, because we just have too many problems, environmental, public health, housing, income. And so we need some fundamental change in the United States. So we try to promote alternatives, including public banking as something that is alive and well in California these days. We're trying to promote alternatives that incorporate the values of human agenda, which once again are democracy, equity, cooperation, kindness, and sustainability. And we know that corporations have nothing to do with those values, that Wells Fargo has nothing to do with those values, and we need to seek alternatives that really do incorporate democracy in our economy and in our political system. So I hope you can go to Human Agenda at humanagenda.net. We are on the website. We do have a page that you can check out, although we don't have a lot of information on the website right now. So thank you everyone for being with us today. I hope that we can connect again, and have a great rest of your Sunday afternoon. Thank you.
It was excellent. Thank you.